my gosh. Chris. Do you have time for coffee?
I do, and today I actually have a real coffee featuring a character named Pusheen the cat,
Oh,
rendered as a very large blob
uh-huh.
with two ears, two eyes, something that looks like a nose, and three independent sets of whiskers. So today
Oh,
I drink coffee. Cat Pushino.
drink one for me. I've only got water.
Cheers.
Yeah, so how's it going? What's on your mind?
Yeah, what is on my mind? Well, I am looking at an email received yesterday. I'm on the mailing list of an organization called Public Citizen, and this email from yesterday afternoon is entitled Locking Doge Out of Education Department. And it begins as follows. We're so busy suing Trump that we haven't even had time to tell you much about this particular case. And the email proceeds to lay out all the things that they're suing about, specifically in this case, that students must submit sensitive personal information to the Department of Education. And here we're talking, of course, about the United States of America. Students must then authorize the department to access their tax records. Under the Federal Privacy Act, the Internal Revenue Code, and the Department of Education's own regulations, I'm quoting here, access to these records is strictly controlled, and these records may be only used for specified purposes. Yet Elon Musk's Doge squad got access to the computer systems that house this data. So, this is just one of many examples of lawsuits that are flying around regarding what is happening here in the United States, particularly around data, data privacy, and the laws that are supposed to control such a thing. Now, I'm certainly not here today to talk about the minutiae of the federal legislative process and federal rulemaking, the authority of agencies and the executive branch, checks on powers of the president, and so on and so forth. There are many other people who are talking about that actively and doing it better than I ever could. Instead, what I'd like to talk about is the relationships that these types of actions are expressing. Now, on the one hand, I'm looking at this in the form of an email with an organization that I necessarily have not been involved in personally. But on the other hand, to me, this is an expression of people who are working together, perhaps in some cases, people who have not worked together before, these moments in time. And in some cases, perhaps people who have worked together before, but are doing so much more actively and specifically to meet the moment. So I don't have some great point to make about what I'm seeing, but this is just what I'm coming to our conversation with today.
Yeah, I've been reading another book because I know last week I talked about a book I read. Um, uh, Two things I've read are coming up for me based on what you just said. One is referring again to Timothy Snyder. He just wrote an article, I think, yesterday, and he was comparing Russia to the United States. And also, he's in Ukraine right now, and he was talking about how people in Ukraine feel sorry for the people in the United States right now. And he said that in general, people in Ukraine are safer than the people in the United States right now. And this is Timothy Snyder. He's an American professor. And he was talking about how though there's parts of Ukraine that are Russian occupied and you can't have anything about Ukraine on your phone or you'll go to jail. So that just brought that up, the stuff the content of what you were saying about that email, that came up for me. But in terms of relationships, yes, the book I want to refer to is called Joyful Militancy. And it's about something like joyful militancy is like antidote to something called rigid radicalism. And so we're talking about movements and activist spaces. And so, although people might be finding each other now in the US to come together to fight some things, and so they're in a kind of relationship with each other, I'm not sure I would I would want people to explore those relationships. Like, are they real relationships, or are they, you know, based on something external, based on panic, fear, overwhelm? And I don't live in the United States, so I don't know what's going on there in terms of like how people are interacting with each other in the face of the past. Has it only been 3 weeks? Oh my gosh. But like, are people doing the whole in group, out group? Are you the kind of person I'm willing to work with? Like, are they doing kind of some gatekeeping? Are they working from a sense of urgency that puts aside care, you know, that puts aside thinking about inclusion, and are we trying to be saviors? Are we listening to the people most impacted? It's it's a great opportunity for people to work on how to be in relationship with each other. How to be flexible and humble and listen. And those kinds of words don't really feel like what's happening in the moment. Like, what's happening in the moment feels like all these emails and all these, I get breaking news all the time. What's Trump doing now? And it feels like, hey, we're going to center flexibility, humility, and care. And it's like, huh? No, there's no time for that. We have to stop them. We have to go complain to the Democrats. Why aren't they doing this? We have to do this, and we have to da 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 da. And so that's kind of what came up for me when you spoke.
So let's talk about this a little bit because I think what you're doing is you're highlighting something that's very important. Now, we haven't discussed this before on this particular podcast, but you are a coach and you talk with organizations and with individuals about culture, feedback culture, and in a way, I might even expand it to talking about mindsets and motivations, intrinsic motivations for behaviors, which is something in my interpretation you've just talked about. So I'm interested to hear how you engage in your coaching with people and organizations who come to you with a mindset of urgency, a mindset of being in action is the only thing that matters, no matter what the action is. And how do you bring them into a space where care becomes the priority? And I will say, and I don't think we need to put this in the show notes because there's so many, there's a whole genre now of YouTube videos where Trump voters are talking about why they voted for Trump and how they didn't think that their spouse was going to get deported or their farm was going to get shut down. And you can imagine the comment sections in these types of videos. Well, FAFO and, well, what did you expect, et cetera, et cetera. So there are these feelings of anger, of irritation, of frustration, and even I said a couple podcasts ago, I'm done trying to convince people. And so that's me expressing some of those feelings as well. Can you tell us how you get people to even pause for a moment and reflect on their intrinsic motivators? And how do you I might even use the word transmute, as if we're transmuting lead into gold, but we're talking about something real, real work that you have done to take people from a place of destruction to a place of rejuvenation, of care. And could you just talk a little bit about that? Because it's very necessary right now.
Yeah, and in the book Joyful Militancy, they talk about transformative joy. So it's like, how do we go from those feelings of like separation, like where were you when we were pro-Palestinian, and now you want to do this, like we hear stories about that. And I think, I mean, there's two ways I would answer that. One is if we're talking about any old organization that has a sense of urgency, which most do. And then the other side is if we're talking about the moment where we are at. For the moment where we are at, I would say remember. I was going to say remember who the enemy is, which is what Joyful Militancy says. Actually, they're not saying the person is the enemy. So I guess that's not a problem. I thought for a second I had an issue with that, but the enemy is the system. It's capitalism, it's empire, it's colonialism. It's not the person who gets sucked into something. It's not the person who was attracted to certain ideas. Um, you know, we have to think about what we have in common with people. And as the memes say, like we have way more in common with people like in China than we do with Musk or Trump, you know? And so the people, to go into the comments of Trump supporters who are surprised and disappointed is like, it can feel satisfying to do that. And there's actually in the book, Joyful Militancy, they say there's something called paranoid reading where you look for fault in everything and you get a sense of satisfaction because you belong to the good guys. You were on the right side the whole time. That is separating us from people when we actually do have a lot in common with these people, you know? And instead, if we used that time that we're devoting to going into the comments section, if we use that time to say welcome to seeing whose interests they really had at heart all this time. A bit like a certain thing that happened on the 5th of December brought a lot of people together,
Mhm.
thinking, oh, we have a common enemy that doesn't care about our help. And so there's that. And then when we look at organizations and their sense of urgency, what I work with folks on is how not taking the time to listen and get good feedback and consult with the people who are impacted by decisions will you end up with a poor service, poor product. You end up having to clean up messes. You get high turnover. You get dissatisfaction. And I was just doing a training with a very large organization yesterday, and they were going on and on about how the computer system had been set up without checking with the people who actually will be using it to input data, and all of the wasted time when they are trying to serve people in the community with a particular health condition, and they're not able to focus on that because they have to deal with all this other stuff. So I think in both those senses, then it's a little bit about like not very strategic. You're kind of wasting your time, like laughing at Trump supporters, wasting your time developing programs and infrastructure without taking into account who's using it. We need to get better about being in relationship with people, the people in our organization, the people we serve, the people in movements, people who are joining the movement for the first time or could potentially. There's that transformative potential there, but we're shutting it down by making fun of them and going in with this paranoid reading.
Yeah, I think what I'm leaving with today is a couple of things. I think in particular, what just came to my mind is something that you and I have discussed in the past, which is this question, who is we exactly? Because we, as in you and I on this podcast, have just now articulated different circles of the term we. We've talked about we as us and those Trump supporters, as an example. We have talked about we as in we the people versus the extraordinarily wealthy, such as Elon Musk. And to illustrate that, you said that we have more in common with people in, let's say, China than we do with the hyper wealthy, like Elon Musk. So I'm leaving again with this amplification of the question, who is we? And in what ways can that word we actually transform and change shape to meet the needs of the moment? Because in a certain way, you are talking about transforming this box of we to be more inclusive and to encompass and include people who indeed are very much in common with us in certain specific ways. The other thing that I'm leaving with today is something that I've also struggled, and I wouldn't say it's a counter to what we're talking about, but it is something that must go along, I believe, must go along with this question of we, which is to say, what are our boundaries? What are the capacity limits to inclusion? Who do we include and who do we exclude? And what is our rationale? How might that change over time? And there are, of course, many ways in which we could talk about this question. But for lack of time, I will just say it's something I'm leaving with and something I wish to reflect on. Because in a way, we are also seeing these same dynamics play out. People saying, no, I'm not going to make amends with people who voted X, Y, or
Mm.
Z. And again, going back to these expressions of anger, hurt, and disappointment. Um, and I think it would be overstating things a little bit to say, uh, yeah, of course, there's no easy answers.
Mm.
But these are some important questions that I think go together and should be
Yeah.
looked at together.
Yeah, absolutely. Boundaries are important, and everyone has a different role to play. Some people have skills in how to meet people where they are, and some people, their skills are more in, strategizing some other aspect of change. So, yeah. Yeah, those are really good questions. I'm so glad you had time to have that coffee with that cat with me.
I am
And
too.
we should do it next week again.
And we will. I look forward to it.
Cool. Thanks. Have a good rest of your day.
You as well. Bye bye.
Bye.
You have been listening to Morning Tinto with Heather Luna and Chris Musay Sequeira. Each time we record, we use the news of the day to be as freshly brewed as possible. So subscribe, follow along, and comment if you can. Let us know what you think, and we will talk to you soon. Bye bye.